Welcome back to Woman, Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda. And we are choosing to record these conversations about sensitive racial topics across racial lines on purpose to help our listeners understand more about how we might feel about things from different racial aspects, and also to encourage you to have these conversations yourself with
Yeah.
a trusted and a trusting friend. Today's topic is
Today's topic, we are going to talk about as he is often dubbed, the father of freedom, President Abraham Lincoln. Now, I don't know if many of you are CNN watchers. I am, and CNN recently it was like a 5 or 6 week series called Lincoln Divided We Stand. And I've watched every single one, and I've talked Linda's ear off about just about every single one, because I learned so much information about Lincoln, because it started literally from his birth all the way through his assassination. And so Lincoln had a very rough start in life. In that period, life was rough in general, but he lost his mother at a very young age. And back in those days, and sometimes now, even when a wife is lost, the husband's first order of business is to go replace her. And so for this to happen, they were literally living in the woods. And so dad left his 2 children, which were relatively young, in the wood for months to go to town to court a woman to get him to marry her and to bring her back to this homestead. So literally for months, Linda, they lived in the woods, catching food, trying to bathe every now and again when they could in a river, just as wild as you could possibly imagine. And so when his new wife came, Lincoln really took to books, which his dad did not appreciate. Lincoln's dad was very much a hands-on man, and Lincoln was an intellectual. Books was where he flourished and where he bloomed. And so that is actually how he become attorney. He didn't go to law school. He read enough law books to be fluent in that language, and just, I'm an attorney now. And so there are lots of different things like that I had learned along the way. One thing I didn't know, which is often not spoken of, is Lincoln's stance on slavery. His idea to free the slaves was not for a moral awakening, and it was not a stance that he had originally had. The whole reason why he got caught up in taking a stance against slavery was when was it the Louisiana Purchase, where from Kansas on, we got more land. And so the delegates for the new territories, wanted to make them slave states. And Lincoln was like, no, we have slaves in the South. As long as those are there, that is fine, but we're not adding new territories where slavery is legal. And so that is originally how he got in that platform and thrust in. It never had anything to do with him thinking slavery was wrong or immoral or inhumane. He just didn't think it should expand. And so, yes. And so there were many different years and things of that nature that went along. And then it came to a point where he won the election, and he won the election simply because he was a Republican, which are not Democrats now, but you had like 3 people running for president. So the second group votes were automatically split because you had 2 people running. And so Lincoln won. And so Lincoln won. And then the South succeeded because Lincoln won, and they thought he was going to immediately end slavery. And so this is where the war starts building, because the South's presumption was, okay, he's the president. He doesn't believe we should expand slavery, so he's probably going to try to take away our slaves anyway as it is. So they succeeded. Now, he wrote a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, because like in 1862, and this is how it read: I will free the slaves. I will declare the slaves free on January 1st of 1863. However, if you rejoin the Union, then you can keep your slaves. So if the South would have just conceded and rejoined the Union, slavery would have continued as it was.
Wow.
Now, doesn't that hit you?
Yeah, it does.
Mhm.
It's another collapse of the dream, of the illusion.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
is.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow.
And we have touted, and we tout Lincoln as such a, and and somewhat is justified, such a larger than life president, that he has been one that everyone has been measured by or against since then. But it was not as if he was a god the way that we tout him to be. Because
Right.
if the South would have conceded, slavery would have continued. And so they started the Civil War, and for some reason they thought this would be a one-day affair. People literally, Linda, got dressed up for the first battle. They made picnic baskets and went and set out on a hill, and they thought they were going to watch an afternoon of fighting and it would all be over.
Oh my goodness.
Yes,
South or North or both?
the Northerners, the Union. You had people from Massachusetts and from New York. They all got dressed up and got on horses and carriages, brought picnic lunches. So they were going to watch the war, watch the battle, and they would win and it would be over.
Wow. Talk about naivety, huh?
Or delusion. Remember we did the episode on white delusion?
Delusion. We've used that word before. Yes,
Yes.
we've used that word before. There were probably
Delusion.
well-meaning white folks, just like I
Yes.
talk about. So
Yes. And so unfortunately, the Confederates slaughtered the Union officers and everyone got ran off and the war began. And this went on for years. And so what became the marker truly for freeing the slaves was he needed manpower to win the war.
oh boy.
So if we free the slaves, then you can come fight for the Union Army.
Mhm.
And so that was really the reason why he signed the Emancipation Proclamation in. Needed more manpower.
Another hero fallen. I mean,
Or
he did accomplish things, but not
yes,
for the reasons that we have allowed ourselves to believe.
right. Or that we were told to believe.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that we were told to believe.
So since I haven't watched that yet,
Mm-hmm.
what if he did not believe that slavery should be expanded, while he didn't necessarily believe that it ought to be stopped? He didn't believe it should be expanded. What was the rationale for that? He was in Illinois. I assume that
Yes.
cabin was in Illinois, correct?
Yes.
What
Mm-hmm.
was his reasoning for that, or was that
I
made?
don't know that he had a rationale other than it's already a standing industry. While I may not necessarily agree with it, it has been long standing in our country, but I don't believe it should continue to grow outside of the territory that it's in.
So he had
And so
some level of ethics or
yeah,
values or right and wrong, but it isn't quite like we have been taught.
yes, or he wasn't at a place where he was willing to pay the cost for making a
Yeah.
statement as
Yeah,
such.
that makes sense.
To making a
Certainly.
statement as such. And
Right.
so he signs the Emancipation Proclamation in order to get more manpower and to win the war, which the Confederate officers took as just the utmost of disrespect, because now you have Black men who were slaves, who have come to join to fight for this country. And they were not paying them equal to what they were paying white soldiers. They did not give them the ammunition or the arms that they needed to properly protect themselves as white soldiers were. So whenever the Black soldiers ran into Confederates, they were literally slaughtered,
Oh boy.
massacred time and time again.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's another piece of history that we have conveniently been allowed to forget. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or some of it completely omitted.
Right.
And depending on where you went to school, or yes, depending on where you went to school, a lot of it was completely omitted. And so
Right.
we had that piece. And so finally, at some point, the Union does win. It was like over, was it 800,000 lives lost? I mean, it was a heavy toll in regard to human lives lost. It was a
I knew it was
heavy
big.
toll.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. It was a heavy toll. And so afterwards, Lincoln, now this was bold for his time, in 1862, invited 5 prominent African Americans from the community in the DC area to the White House to talk about what it would look like now since Black people were free. And so all of the speakers, they had ideas and notions and this, that, and other. Lincoln's idea was to gather up all the former slaves and recolonize them either in Africa or in Central America. That was also a new bit of information. And we balk at that, and the 5 Black people who were there balk at that. But he made a statement, and I wish the statement would have been contemplated more. Now, this is in 1862. A white man who was the president.
This was at the start of the war still, or
this right. This is yes. The war is going. It's still happening right now.
right.
And so it is actively happening, and he's seeing the end of it and figuring out, okay, so once you all are free, what will it look like for you in the United States? So in 1862, a white man who was the president says to these 5 prominent African American people who are saying we need to stay here, he goes, I think white people are so generally prejudiced that you will never find success and happiness here.
Wow.
That was said in 1862.
62.
And from that day to this one.
160 years later.
Yes, and those words still ring true.
Right, they do.
And so while they balked, I think that should have been worth contemplation. Simply because if the president of the very nation says that to you, this is what I think, and I haven't even experienced it like you have. You're never going to find what you're looking for here. That was a tremendous truth to be spoken.
It was. Mm-hmm. And even though he may have meant it kindly, it seems so radical. And I'm sure they heard it that way. And I have no idea whether it would have been a good thing back then or not a good thing, but it would have been an extremely brazen thing to do.
It would have. But if you think about all of the massacres after Reconstruction, where the Ku Klux Klan was formed and white people literally just went around in packs just killing Black people because they could.
Yeah.
If we had not have been here, think about how many lives would be different, what that could have looked like. And so that has stuck with me, that he was able to speak that truth out loud.
Wow.
To Black people in 1862.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I know you just like that one. You got to sit and let it run along in your brain, and
right?
All sorts of things. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And so we watched it, and I watched through the end of it, and people often think that John Wilkes Booth murdered Lincoln because he freed the slaves. That was not the case either. John Wilkes Booth murdered Lincoln because Lincoln wanted to give Black people the right to vote and participate fully in the society. That's why President Lincoln was assassinated.
Ooh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Like the news in the last week, for example.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So John Wilkes Booth now looks like Brian Kemp of Georgia.
Right.
Looks like, Mike Parsons of Missouri, and every other governor who's pushing for voter suppression laws. That's the new John Wilkes Booth.
Right. It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Completely is. Wow.
Yeah.
Some of these things just make you want to cry.
Yes. And some of them deserve tears. They really do. Mm-hmm. They really do deserve tears and the grief and the recognition. But I tell you, the truth is powerful. Sometimes it is painful, but knowing information and knowing the true story is powerful, and it is empowering. And so CNN did a wonderful job on that documentary. So I highly recommend people to go and watch it. I can't remember if it's 5 or 6 episodes, and they're each an hour long. But wow, to look at, and it also speaks to the evolution of a person and how you can evolve and change over the course of a lifetime if you take the time to expose yourselves to different things, to forge relationships. Like him and Frederick Douglass had many, many conversations. He had the utmost respect for Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist.
Yes.
So when you open the door and sit down and listen and talk and learn, then that has the power to change you and your viewpoints and how you use your power to
Right.
make changes.
Right. Wow, that's beautiful. And yes, I mean, literally, they were having 160 some years ago, they were having conversations in black and white like ours. Appropriate at the time, but probably more in common than we'd like to think.
Yes. Yeah.
About what are the answers? What are the answers to the hatred? What are the answers to the injustices? And so, wow. Okay, you've inspired me. Now I'm going to have to watch that one. Do you remember the title? It's on CNN. Is it available on CNN?
It's probably on YouTube or on CNN on demand, but it is called Lincoln Divided We Stand.
Lincoln Divided We Stand. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So.
Yeah.
All right. That's
so
good synopsis.
Yes, and that's a heavy one to sit with. So I encourage everyone, when you do watch it, I'm glad they were a week apart because it gave me time to mentally digest it and go through it, if that makes sense.
Right.
So that would be a hard one to watch back to back to back to back because it's just so much information to process.
And sometimes, when
Mhm.
there's that much information, you just lose track if you take it all in at once, like eating too big of a meal.
Mhm.
So
Yes, and
it's
it's
like
also
go slow.
and it's also antithetical to what we've been taught about Lincoln. So not only are you digesting new information, you're sorting through like, wait a minute, that's not what they said about Lincoln,
Right.
or that's not what I was taught, or I didn't know this piece. And so you have those two things going on in your head at the same time. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. Is that a good place to quit for this one?
I would say that it is. So go to find CNN, Lincoln Divided We Stand, watch it, take notes, find someone to talk about with, start talking and keep talking. And we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.